Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Welcome to another live NASM study. We are continuing in chapter 5, and this is the nervous system, the skeletal muscular system. And in this video, we're going to be going over the lesson that they have on the muscular system. For those of you that are BDU students, you've gone through this material. It's important to know from that one perspective. Please understand, though, for you guys that are doing your NASM, for anybody that's on the course, good to see you guys, by the way, and anybody watching this video as it's uploaded into our YouTube channel, please make sure you understand that chapter 5 is, believe it or not really that important of a chapter when it comes to the testing. This is what we would term a moderate priority chapter. Will you get questions? Absolutely. But for the most part, if you've done your BDU materials and went through that course, this is just going to be sort of a review. NASM does go a little bit more in depth. It does into the muscular system, but for the most part, they're just not going to ask you a lot of questions, particularly on the specifics of the anatomy, for instance, and even the physiology. But we got to go through it. You got to know the material. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Remember, if you got questions, just raise your hand and we'll get moving on it. So again, this is chapter 5. And in their online course, they call it lesson 4. It's not relevant if you got the textbook. So the first thing to kind of keep in mind it's basically a review is the idea that the muscular system, for the most part, connects, if you want to say it that way, the nervous system, right? Or at least the motor control nervous part of the nervous system with the skeletal system. So that's why NASM puts it together this way. The nervous skeletal muscular system is that the nerves can't move the bones, and the bones, your skeleton, cannot move without some outside impetus. And that's the muscular system. So the nerves innervate the muscles contract, and that's what moves the skeleton. Okay, there's your, basically your 5th grade explanation of how these three work together. And that's probably the simplest way to do it. So keep in mind that when we're going through any chapter in their textbook, this is from a testing perspective, what's going to be the most important thing we do? We're going to go to the back of the chapter, read the chapter highlights, which are bullet points, and go through those first, and then come back to the beginning of the chapter, make our way through, always looking for what? We are looking for side panel terms, right? And you're going to see those on the next page. So we're looking for terms that they put in there because they feel that those terms are important enough that you should understand them and memorize them. And then we're also going to look for tables, if there are any, and internal to the chapter, bullet points that are located, because that's generally an indication that it's important information. Y'all got that? You're also going to see the little boxes like training tips box and increase your knowledge. And I'll point those out as well. It is important that you kind of read through those. I'm not saying you got to study them to any great extent. But let's go ahead. Again, this page, nothing of importance here. What do we see first? Right off the bat, what do we see? We see sidebar terms, right? So skeletal muscle, what is it? Right? Again, I'm not sure you want to spend a lot of time on the terms you already know. When you went through the BDU modules in lesson 1, we went through this. What is fascia? It's just connective tissue, right? Located around the muscles and the bones. What are the connective tissue coating or coverings within the muscle itself? Well, we have the epimysium, and that's the layer of fascia that surrounds the muscle itself. You guys remember this? Okay. Then you've got fascicles, which are the bundles of muscle fibers inside the muscle. And what surrounds the fascicles? It's the perimysium. So epi, peri, endo. Epi, peri, endo. I'm pretty sure that if you're going to get a question on this area, it's probably going to be related to one of these terms, guys, just so you know. I'm not going to give you 100% clarity on that one, but this is good. So epi, peri, endo. Does that make sense to everybody? The endomysium is what wraps around individual muscle fibers. Y'all got that? Yes. So again, this right here is just a recap from the Body Design University, Module 1, Lesson 1, component to that course, right? So we have the muscle belly, like your bicep. It's functionally broken up into fascicles, right? And then into muscle cells. And then you can see on the next page, um, it breaks it down, goes deeper and deeper into the structure of the muscle to where we see muscle fibers and those contractile elements known as myofibrils. Myofibrils are made up of smaller structures known as what? Sarcomeres. Sarcomeres are made up of what? Myofilaments, right? So that's how it works. Muscle belly, fat, right? From larger to smaller. Let me go on to the next page because that's where they're going to show it to you. So see this? See, here's the helpful hint box. Read it. This is helpful. Okay. Muscles, right, are the largest category, right, of structures, contractile structures. So you got the muscle belly. Muscle belly is composed of fascicles. Fascicles are composed of muscle fibers, which are composed of you guys get this? Myofibrils. Myofibrils are essentially long chains of sarcomeres. Okay. And the sarcomeres themselves are made up of the myofilaments. The two we normally talk about are actin and myosin. There's more proteins located in there, but for the sake of personal trainers, we don't need to get too deep into it. So, and here's where they discuss the actin and myosin. But remember, let me go back. There are terms you want to know. Does everybody know what glycogen is? Yes? It's the storage form of glucose within muscle cells. Okay? Glucose that is deposited and stored in bodily tissue, such as the liver and muscle cells. It's the storage form of carbohydrates, if you want to say it like that. Myoglobin, right? You all familiar with these terms? I hope. Talk about these terms in the modules. Myoglobin is the oxygen carrying iron rich protein found in muscles. Hemoglobin is a similar, not exactly the same, but a very similar molecule that's found in the blood. Hemoglobin, myoglobin is in the muscles. Myo is short for muscle, Latin for muscle. So myos is going to, anything where you see myo, something like this, probably going to be related to muscle, right? Myofibrils, myofilaments. It's a good idea to study this enough to where you understand basic structures of the muscles. Actin and myosin are the two main contractile myofilaments. The sarcomere is the fundamental contractile unit in a muscle cell, right? They throw in a little bit more stuff here, the meeting point of each sarcomere. Don't get too caught up. Guys, do not spend a lot of time studying this, trying to learn everything about this. This is not it's not a course on anatomy physiology, okay? So you study just enough and then move on. So this next page, we saw neural activation. By the way, before I even open this up, could you kind of understand what neural activation even means? Of course you can, right? This is going to be the nervous system, right? It's going to signal the muscles to contract. So even if I didn't open that up for you, I think you can figure out what it means. Neuromuscular junctions, right? This is a site where the nervous system communicates directly with muscle fibers, right? The neuromuscular junction is where we have what's known as the synaptic cleft or the synapse between the end of the nerve cell and the membrane of the muscle cell, right? We have what's known as a synaptic cleft, and this is where neurotransmitters cross over from the end plate of the nerve and float across into the muscle, into those neurotransmitting receptor sites. Does that make sense? So again, this is all technical physiology, anatomy and physiology. A junction or small gap between a motor neuron and muscle cells. That's the synapse. You guys have seen pictures of this, right? Inside here, this is where the synapse is going to be, right? Or the synaptic cleft. And then what is a motor unit? It's a single muscle cell. Does this sound familiar, guys, from the BDU materials? Please say yes, right? Please say yes. Mark, I can't see you, but I know you're shaking your head yes. Um, Again, don't spend a ton of time, but read through it, right? Make sure you understand what these are. Here is a more expanded view, right, of that synaptic cleft, right in here, or the synaptic gap, whatever you want to call it. So neurotransmitters, right? Neurotransmitters like acetylcholine. These are the chemical messengers that cross the synapse and assist with nerve transmission. Okay. Again, we don't want to get too deep into this, guys. There's a lot of stuff happening here that's not necessary for a trainer to know or understand. It's just not that important. I'll be honest with you. Okay. And even from a testing perspective, you may get a question or two here. Acetylcholine is the sort of predominant neurotransmitter that helps create the action potential across the synaptic cleft. Um, Sliding filament theory. You guys get this? Does this sound familiar? Of course it does. Sliding filament theory is just those steps, right, that we acknowledge. This is a structural. There's a chemical component to this, of course, but this is the structural explanation of how muscle cells shorten. The sliding filament theory. Myofilaments, actin and myosin filaments, sort of cross over each other and shorten the sarcomere, and this occurs through relatively simple mechanism where the heads of the myosin, as you can see in this picture, that's why I always want you to look at pictures or the figures. It's where the head of the myosin pulls the actin filaments closer together. That shortens the sarcomere. When you have all the sarcomere shortening at one time, the myofibril shortens. When you have enough myofibrils all shortening, the muscle cell shortens. And that's how we have the entirety of the muscle belly shortening to overcome resistance. Okay. The excitation contraction coupling, again, not a bad idea to read it at least. That's the physiological process of converting an electrical stimulus from the nerve into a muscle contraction. So this term simply explains all those things we just talked about, those multiple steps, right? So we have an action potential coming from the neuron to the synapse, synaptic cleft. Acetylcholine crosses the gap, goes into the muscle, into that cleft in the muscle. The receptor sites accept those neurotransmitters, and they tell the muscle to do certain things, particularly the release of calcium ions throughout the entirety of the muscle through the endoplasmic reticulum, and the muscle shortens. There. I just explained one semester in literally 10 seconds. Okay, so that's the sliding filament theory. Again, it just explains the steps in the shortening of muscle fibers. And that's the excitation contraction coupling. You could, of course, read this right here. It's way more complicated than you need in your career as a personal trainer, so to speak. Once again, you can see how a lot of folks will look at chapter 5 and go, oh man, I got to study so much for this, when in reality, they're just not going to ask you a lot of questions. So is that good, guys? You good so far? All right. So moving on, we now have a couple of more terms. The power stroke, that's when the myosin heads bind to the actin, like we were talking about. This is called cross bridging. Okay. Cross bridging is the initial attachment of the myosin head to the actin filaments on either side of the myosin molecule. So you have what's known as cross bridging, and then when the head of the myosin moves forward in toward the center of the myosin molecule, have what we call the power stroke. Right? It's just whoosh, pulls the actin filaments closer together, and as that happens over and over, you have this shortening of the sarcomere. Of course, we get into what we're talking about right now in the BDU live study is the ATP molecule, which is the high energy molecule that serves as the main form of energy in the human body. It's called the energy currency. ATP, actually, it's not just in humans, it's the It is the molecular energy unit of life on Earth. Just so you guys know, it's not just humans, right? ATP is the fundamental energy unit. It is the foundational molecule for life, all life on Earth. Okay. Again, as you're going through this, you'll see this little helpful hint box. Absolutely. Just read it, guys. Two major principles. Sarcomere shortens. You should just know the definition of some of these words and terms. So the sarcomere stretch your knowledge. Sure, it doesn't hurt to at least read it. Not sure they're going to ask you any questions on that particular stretch your knowledge box. Okay. Last one here. Remember, I do recommend, even if it's a moderate to low priority chapter, please read or at least take some time to study a little bit on these terms on the sidebar. Okay, you guys got that? Okay, next part is the MODI unit. Now we're getting to information that actually is important in the real world, not just from a testing perspective. If you are not familiar with the different muscle fiber types, we have two general types of muscle fibers, type 1 and type 2. The type 2 muscle fibers are subcategorized into type 2A and type 2X. And then we have what's known as the all or nothing principle. So again, in your textbook, this will already look like this. It'll already look like that. So study those. Remember, you have the Quizlet study sets. All of the terms, by the way, in the side panel, that's what your chapter Quizlet study sets are made up of, by the way, just so you know. Guys, please don't be spending a whole lot of time reading this. Why? Because it's just text. There's no bullet points, right? There's no tables or charts. Don't read, again, you don't want to be reading this textbook like a novel. You get everything you need for the most part right here by looking at these terms. Okay, and you see they're in blue, which means those are the important terms or concepts. So just from an efficiency standpoint, I don't recommend you spend a whole lot of time reading when it's just text. They're going to summarize it somewhere along the line for you, kind of like right here. You get the idea? That was a nice segue, wasn't it? So muscle fiber types. What did we just look at? Type 1 and type 2, right? Well, here are the characteristics. Remember, when you get to a table, now you want to pay attention, even in a moderate priority or low priority chapter. This is where you pay attention. So these are your characteristics, and you should know those characteristics, right? So I don't think it's really difficult to memorize these because a lot of them work off of each other, right? If a type 1 muscle fiber has more capillaries, mitochondria, and myoglobin, it's going to that's what allows for oxygen, the establishment of oxygen molecules in that muscle fiber, guys. More capillaries means more blood, right? From the arterial system. More blood, but where is the oxygen carried? It's in the blood. So more mitochondria. Where does aerobic respiration, cellular respiration occur? In the mitochondria. So the more mitochondria a muscle cell has, the more it's going to be aerobically capable. Aerobically capable, meaning it can go it can contract and shorten for extended periods of time. Myoglobin, we already talked about. That is the iron containing, oxygen rich protein molecule, right? Located inside type 1 muscle fibers. Obviously, it's increased oxygen. We do know type 1 are smaller in size. They're not meant for strength and power. So therefore, they have less. You see how that works? Can you guys see how this works? You can explain a type 1 muscle fiber to me by just getting one thing. Lots of oxygen, more blood to it. Okay. Increased oxygen carrying capacity, more endurance capable. Well, if it's an endurance muscle cell, muscle fiber, it's probably not a strength or power muscle fiber. It's not designed for that. If it's weaker, small, it's got to have a smaller diameter, doesn't have the same power output. You guys get that? That's why now you can if you're going to put your time in here, this is where you look. Everybody good with that? What are capillaries? The smallest blood vessels and the site of exchange of elements. So remember, you have arteries, arterioles, capillaries or capillary beds. This is where on one side of the capillary bed from the arterial system, we have the movement of oxygen and nutrients into the cells of the body. And then on the other side of the capillary bed, we move into the venous system, right? So now we have capillaries providing nutrients, and then that's going to transfer over to the other side of the capillary bed where now we have waste product going into that side of the capillary bed, moving into venules and then ultimately veins. Right? Some very, very interesting systems. Fairly complicated, by the way, as well. Does that make sense? So there's your explanation of capillaries. Again, please do not go Googling this and spend the next 5 hours trying to understand all this stuff. It's not necessary. Okay, last but not least, is they're going to give you a brief getting technical box. Okay, type 2A and type 2X. And like I said earlier, the type 2 fibers are subdivided into 2A and 2X based on their chemical mechanical properties. And that's going to finish up your chapter, or at least that lesson. And then next week, guys, we will move into their next lesson. Again, read the chapter highlights if you haven't done so, right from the very beginning, as soon as you start a chapter. Okay. And now I'm just going to move forward here. If you got any questions, guys, that ends chapter 5. You can review it, but I'm going to reiterate because this is really important. Do not spend an inordinate amount of time studying chapter 5. I know it's tough. I know you're looking at it going, but Doug, there's so much information and material. That's right. And they're just not going to ask you a lot of questions on it. Okay. So be smart when you're studying through this stuff. It's interesting. You can go through it, but don't spend a ton of time studying it. Is everybody with me? Yes? All right, guys. Well, look, it's great having you all on board with us. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us know you have any questions. Have a great weekend. We will see you next week.